Hi, everyone, and welcome to another comics loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I am delighted to be talking with writer and editor Ivan Cohen. Ivan, thank you for jumping in, joining, talking with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. As you know, if you've heard some of the episodes, I tend to start out with a couple of representative titles, but you've worked in a lot of books, and so certainly feel free to tag anything that I miss. But Batman Scooby-Doo being a recent work, I love it because there was an old episode of the Scooby-Doo cartoon that brought the characters together, so it's just like a continuation of that. In the world of Batman animation, Beware the Batman. But then there is Gotham Noir, which I really enjoy and appreciate. You remember that one? Elseworlds. It was like a
Oh, sure.
Brubaker.
I was just a little junior editor assistant on
Yeah,
that. Yeah, no,
yeah.
that's a good poll.
Thank you, thank you. And then also Wonder Woman and many other DC characters are books that you've worked on, at least in the editorial stance.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that recently. I was prompted with a question about that. And I've worked on almost everything I grew up loving, pretty much.
Hmm, hmm.
I've had a chance to work on in some capacity. I think Legion of Superheroes is probably the only thing that, oh, no, actually, I worked on one of my last jobs at DC. I was on staff there for more than a decade, and in my last job there, I was involved in managing the DC side of media projects. So I worked on the Legion of Superheroes cartoon. So yeah, I've worked on everything.
There you
Everything
go.
DC wise, at least. Marvel, I still have. There's still a few trophies I need to find,
Hmm, hmm.
but DC has been very kind to me over the last few years. So,
I
but
love that.
yeah,
Like,
Batman.
oh,
Sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just gonna say, I love that role player metaphor of being like getting the trophies as you go through the creative process. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, Batman Scooby-Doo has been amazing. I mean, that has
Mhm.
been the opportunity to do that, and the fact that it has grown from it's going to be 12 issues. Now it's going to be another 12 issues. Now it's going to be an ongoing. I don't get to write every issue, which, there's the ego and pocketbook part of me that says, oh, come on, I could write all of them. And then there's the part where I get so much stage fright from writing that book that I'm like, I couldn't do this monthly. It would be a real struggle. It
Yeah,
takes much too long. I, I, I suffer for it.
yeah,
I
yeah,
told I, I told my wife I recently I was like I just wish I were a little bit more of a hack, so like I just the old school guys, someone who immensely talented, more talented than I know that it would be like the kind of thing. It's like you took more than a day to write a comic. What's wrong with you?
You want to
Jack
get it
Kirby
right.
writing two while drawing two with his feet, and
Right.
they comics you've ever seen, and you'd be
Yeah, and,
plotting
and
out the
three more
code.
ideas on the way.
God. I forget if it was, I think it was the magazine, the Jack Kirby Collector at one point had a thing about what was his most prolific month just based on what came out, which obviously wasn't what he was drawing at the time. And it was like, well, the Fantastic Four annual, which was an original, 30-page story, and X-Men #1, and it was like four other things. I was like, how is that? How is that possible? I, and maybe if he had been paid a living wage, he wouldn't have done
Right.
as many, but we'll never know.
True. True. We
But
can just look back and appreciate.
sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, Batman Scooby-Doo is quite the book. And but yeah, editorially, I mean, working on Wonder Woman, the first run that Greg Rucka did was one of the major highlights of my career. I mean, I had known Greg for a while, and I think part of the reason I got the job was I think fairly or not, he had a reputation for being a little bit prickly, and
Mm.
he and I were very friendly and had been for a long time. So I think the assumption was that would help a little, or at least there would be a greater presumption of goodwill.
Hmm,
Like
hmm.
even if I, in the editor's chair, had to ask things or tell him things that he wasn't going to want to hear, at least he would understand that it wasn't coming from a place of malice or cold-heartedness. But
Hmm.
we're still friends, so it didn't. You know, it didn't end the relationship, which I think is always possible.
If you can be someone's editor and still be friends after, that's a huge compliment. That's professional negotiation and navigation right there.
In my years in comics, I'm very happy that I don't think it's okay. It's cost me a friendship or two, but nothing major. But I'm Mark Wade, who's a very good friend and has been, I wouldn't say a mentor, but he has helped me a lot over the years. And we have said occasionally that the reason we have such a good relationship is that he and I have never actually worked together directly on anything. That has really preserved a lot of mutual respect.
Yes,
But
yes.
uh,
Yeah. So in terms of editing and collaboration and things like that, any particular highlights on the journey? Any folks that have been some of the most positive experiences to work with? Recognizing that if you leave someone out, it doesn't mean it wasn't positive. It just means
oh no,
it's a
sure.
limiting question.
I mean, there's so many, and comics are so collaborative. It's so much you know, I mean, there are a few people who can do all the things, and God bless them and more power to them, although their lives are incredibly hard. But
Mhm, mhm,
it's all collaboration. I mean, my my first job in comics was at DC in marketing, and I learned a lot from the folks there. But when I went into editorial, I was Mike Carlin's assistant,
mhm,
and Mike taught me so much. I mean, just his understanding of all the pieces of it, his artistic sense, having been, having learned from, Kurtzman and Eisner, and knowing how covers worked and knowing how a page could be made better, and through him getting to work with people like you mentioned with Gotham Art, getting to work with Ed Brubaker, getting to work with everybody on the Stan Lee Just Imagine project, even though
mhm, mhm.
those books were not, I would say, especially great. The murderer's row of artistic talent that was there was just incredible.
Yeah. And they're
Learned,
enjoyable in their own right.
oh, sure, they are. I think they probably are less than the sum of their parts for a variety of reasons, but Stan wasn't at the peak of his powers, and the sort of creative constraints of using DC brands
Mhm,
without necessarily, without it using the names without it being the characters was liberating in some ways. But then on the other hand, you're sort of like, yeah, it'd be kind of cool to see Stan write, Batman.
mhm,
Like, but we didn't have that. We had Stan writing a different Batman. But getting these pages in, and you're talking before the before the recorder started. Mark Chiarello, who was in charge of sort of the visual concepts of DC's books for many years, was on staff when I was on staff, and he sitting and listening to him talk about how to do covers and what the idea of the cover as a poster for the contents was fascinating.
mhm,
And that stuff I use in my professional life pretty much every day in one version or another. I sometimes get the chance to suggest cover concepts for Batman Scooby-Doo, for instance, and that's always tremendously fun. Um, I worked on, in terms of collaborations, the only time I've ever worked directly with a co-writer was with a writer named Danny Lore on
mhm,
the Multiversity Teen Justice book. And that was a fascinating process. I didn't know Danny before we started working together. Um, they had a great affinity for the character Kid Quick, who I had created in a DC holiday special years earlier, which was DC's first non-binary superhero character, which was this lightning in a bottle
mhm,
moment
mhm,
where,
mhm,
you know, middle-aged cis male somehow creates a character that, spoke to a tremendous population that didn't feel they were necessarily seen in comics, which was, unexpected and wonderful. And that, I've been treated with nothing but kindness and appreciation by that community of fans, which has just been, beyond wonderful. But co-writing the book, we got to do this mini series that, you know, may not have been quite as good as we had hoped, but it was really it it upped my game a little bit. It We brought out the worst in each other, I think, in terms of scheduling. I think we were both able to lean into the idea of like, well, I'll wait for my co-writer to do that part before I write the rest of it. And so, the deadlines got more and more um, not achieved.
Hmm.
But it was really interesting to work so closely with somebody who wrote in a very different style from how I did, and it it freed me up a little. It freed me up to try different stuff, and I've tried to continue that while working on solo projects, like Batman Scooby, like a bunch of the custom projects I do.
Hmm.
Which
Hmm.
you didn't mention the interesting. I've ended up my editor. There's an editor named Michael McAllister at DC who, I appreciate and blame him for keeping me in comics because he gives me so much. He thinks of me as his go-to for, custom comics projects, which I don't know to what extent, I mean, they're all custom comics are things where they're sort of commissioned um, for a sponsor as opposed to being a book that DC publishes to sort of succeed or fail on its own merits.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the Snickers ads that ran inside the pages of DC Comics that had DC superheroes in them, that would be a custom comic. The Warner Brothers Studio Tour commissioned a comic
Hmm.
that had the Justice League on the Warner Brothers lot having an adventure, and that was then sold in a reprint of Justice League #1 at the studio store, but it included this special comic that I had written. But stuff like that, where it's sort of created for an alternative purpose, and I've gotten to do a bunch of those. I have two coming up in the next year that are I can't talk about them because of NDAs, but they're one of them would be a bucket list project if I had ever understood that it was possible I would ever get to write this particular thing.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
so there are surprises in all of it.
Nice. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's a pretty wild set of circumstances that have landed me here. But the collaborations are very important. I learn more about how to do this all the time. I've been writing comics now for probably 10 or 15 years, and I think I'm finally starting to get the hang of it, which is, my apologies to people who bought the ones early, but I think
Well, that's both the creative humility and then I don't know. I think of teaching as a creative profession too, and I'm so critical of myself in my first few years, and yet I'll have people reach out and go, "You were so great," and it's like, really, really. So we never know the impact, I think, of what we create and what we put out into the world.
I used to run it's absolutely true. I used to run for a time DC's editorial internship program, and I had an intern come up to me once and say and thank me for some advice I had given them, and I have no idea what advice. I have no idea what he's thanking me for. Just like, was I 35 when I told you something meaningful about how to govern your professional life? I don't know. I mean, I said you're welcome. I don't know what wisdom I had then. I don't know what wisdom I have now. But um, but yeah, it's fine. When I was working in editorial and we would commission, books, there'd be it was always the case. Like there'd be like a new ongoing project where the writer and artist would both be like, God, I wish I could go back and like around issue 3, they'd be like, I wish I could go back and redo 1 and 2 because I
Mhm,
finally get
mhm.
it. And it's sort
Right.
of there's no financial model that works where you could say, why don't you do 3 issues before we do the first one?
Right.
And
Right.
then like really work this out. But it's like, I mean, it's like that in any creative endeavor. You watch TV shows and the pilots are rarely the first episodes are pretty much never the best episode of any show.
Mhm, mhm.
Like they have so much explaining to do, and the actors don't really know who the characters are yet, and the writers probably didn't know, and they
Yeah.
figure it out later, and you're like, oh, right, that's who that is.
Yeah, the
Oh, and no
story
one
sort of
will.
grows.
Luckily, no one will ever watch those early episodes again.
And then came streaming.
And then came streaming.
So you mentioned some of the custom comics, but anything else that's on the creative table that you can talk about or hint at? Nothing in NDA land, but anything that currently has your creative direction.
Oh, things that are out now or things that are coming out?
Hmm. Hmm.
Sure. Yeah, it's hard to keep track. a Looney Tunes issue that just came out. It was a Lola Bunny story, which, as someone whose real appreciation of Looney Tunes cartoons predated her existence, that was sort of a
Mhm.
challenge, but fun. There's new Batman Scooby-Doo issues coming up. I have this book coming out in July, which is a storybook style book based on the Big Bang Theory TV
I
show.
saw
It's sort of
that.
like
Yeah.
they've done them for I don't know if it was the same publisher for all of them. There were ones on the TV show The Office and Parks and Recreation where it's sort of slightly deformed younger versions of these characters. Like, it's the characters of The Office, but they're 10 and they're having some sort of experience together. And that was really challenging. I mean, Big Bang Theory, they're not my favorite TV show, though I was familiar with it, as I think, you're in the culture and you sort of have to be.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
that was so that was super exciting. And a thing I worked on, 3 years ago. There's a book coming out in September called The Mad Files, which is a book being published by the Library of America, who are sort of fancy literature, a fancy literature group that occasionally do these anthologies, and they commissioned a book of essays about, and some, I think there's some comics in it as well, about Mad Magazine and its legacy. And I was asked to do something on it. So back in 2021, I wrote this essay for it. And then I mean, in the world of imposter syndrome, I saw the list of who's working on it, and they haven't announced everybody yet. But it's like, oh, so I'll be in a book with new material from Art Spiegelman and and Roz Chast
Oh
and
wow.
David Hodgdu and other people I cannot mention yet. I don't know why they weren't in the initial release, but it's like I think I'm the only one who doesn't have a Wikipedia page. I gotta step that up. But it was
All the
like, well,
people you have dinner with all the time.
oh, sure, sure. It's a lot of fancy dress events here in New York that honestly, I think people think we go to museum openings and the Statue of Liberty every day, and it's like, no, sometimes we just do laundry.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's actually, we unpack our moving boxes and, struggle to pay the rent. But so that's coming out, and that will be fun. I spent a lot of years, both in my freelance life and even a little bit, I wouldn't call it moonlighting, but doing work on the side, writing about pop culture things. So this was a chance to stretch those muscles again. And I wrote
Great.
about
Great.
Mad. It's sort of the idea, the cliche of the golden age of comics, or the golden age of whatever, is 11. The idea that whatever you liked when you were 11 years old, that's sort of your territory. So I ended
Mhm.
up going back and looking at the issues of Mad I would have read when I was 11, and boy, it's amazing that I liked any of it. It would it may have been a somewhat fallow period, with all respect to the usual gang of idiots in the late 70s.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
there's that, and there's other secret stuff, and I have things coming out from Ahoy and Valiant in the next year, which should be very exciting. It's fun to work for some new people doing some new stuff.
So I usually ask this question first, but by means of a final question, um, curious about kind of the creator origins, what initially got you into comics, and then also places where people can go and find out more information about your work. It's a
Sure.
two-parter.
I know. I was going to say, and they're very, very hard to connect. No narrative. There's real no narrative connection there. My creator origin story, as far as how I first was sort of exposed to visual storytelling, aside from the usual, like every 4-year-old is handed storybooks at some point. The stuff I remember is I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and there was a closet in my bedroom that clearly had never been completely cleaned out. And there were some very beat up comics in there. And to this day, I don't know which of my siblings had them
Yeah, yeah.
originally, but there was Batman number 250, which was the Batman Nobody Knows, which is where Bruce Wayne goes on a camping trip with urban children and they tell him stories about what they think Batman is like. And it's nuts. It's
Yeah.
crazy. I did a story for a Valentine's Day special where I sort of loosely related it to it with people telling different stories about Aquaman. And I'm the only person who knows that it was in any way inspired by that story. But there was that. There was a Brave and the Bold with Batman and Adam Strange. Like it's weird, I'm sure I was watching Super Friends at the same time. I'm sure that was the Shazam TV show. I'm sure that was all bubbling around. And then my mom had bought, I'm sure she regretted it to the day she passed, that she had given me a couple of rainy day comic books.
Mm-hmm,
And I
mm-hmm.
don't know how long they sat in a drawer somewhere before she gave them to me. And it was an issue of The Flash that was part one of a three-part story with Earth 2 and the Golden Age Flash and Vandal Savage. And I didn't see the second and third parts for maybe 20 years. Like, but whenever anybody says comics are too complicated, I'm always like, I disagree. I read a book that had the multiverse explained in one panel.
That is true.
And I
Yes.
and I had no issues. And the other comic was like I think it was Batman fighting Wildcat in a boxing ring, and an Action Comics issue that had Lois Lane figuring out how Clark Kent and Superman were not the same person, but that Clark Kent could call Superman because of a chemical in his hair, and and that was why sometimes he had a spit curl and sometimes he didn't, because he would push his hair back, and that was a single. The obvious thing.
Yes, of
You
course.
do have to be a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter to have figured out the hair radio signal to Superman connection. But although I'll just say it as an aside, I sometimes think this. It's like so much mainstream comics is based on the idea of like the illusion of change, like the illusion
Hmm,
of change.
hmm.
We don't really change things. It has been, I think it's now like 30 years since the status quo in comics was that Lois Lane didn't know Superman's secret identity.
Yeah.
30 years. Like that was an immovable object. Like that was a cornerstone of culture, was the crazy love triangle where reporter Lois Lane can't figure out that the guy she knows takes off his glasses and looks exactly like Superman. Like that
Yes.
was a thing forever. And now it's not a thing at all. There's, two generations of comics readers who have never read a contemporary comic where that was the thing. That occasionally blows my middle-aged brain. Um,
The Richard
so yeah,
Donner scene
so
where he's like flying in and out, and it's like, oh, hi, Lois. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to go. Yeah, anyway,
I
sorry.
forgot something. I'll be right back. Hello, Lois. Comics are the best. I love Superman so much. Every time I get to write Superman, even if it's, selling candy bars, I'm still always just like, how did this happen? How do I get to do this? Um, if people want to see what I'm up to, you would ask that. See, no transition at all. Um,
Let's see. Let's see. How
Smooth.
can we?
If I had known,
Yeah.
oh, I got it. I got it. Get
Yes.
ready.
Okay.
So if I had known when I was reading these comics that there would someday be a time where you could like read comics on a computer that you would own or a thing you'd be
Right.
carrying in your pocket, it would be incredible. And the idea that you could keep up with your favorite creators
That's right.
and know about them on different, internet platforms. I wouldn't have even known what to make of it. But places like ivanmcohen.com, which is my
Absolutely.
website, which I try to keep up to date, that has a complete list of all the crazy stuff I've worked on. It has links. It also has no, from my more mainstreamy pop culture writing stuff, it actually has almost everything I've written. I sort of I somehow anticipated that everything would be behind paywalls or disappear, so I got PDFs of them and slapped them up there so people can read all sorts of things I've written on all sorts of topics. So that's at ivanmcohen.com. I'm on Twitter still reluctantly, and that's
Hmm.
also Ivan M. Cohen. Um, Instagram, however, connects to Facebook, and I'm there, but I don't understand it. And I'm on Blue Sky, which I like, but I can't get the hang of either. I gotta write stuff. I don't have time, and yet I find the time to see what everybody else is doing.
Oh yeah.
But that's the easiest way. I try to self-promote, in as semi-aggressive a fashion as I can. Not because I get paid more if people buy the stuff, but I just, you don't want to work in a vacuum,
Hmm, hmm.
and little kids don't write as many fan letters to Looney Tunes as you would like. So I like to get someone to know that's going on who can communicate appreciatively. Ugh, English. That's about it. But this
Well,
was a pleasure. I feel like there's a million other things we could have talked about. I will say in my collaborative life, I got to work on animated DC movies. So I got to work with Dwayne McDuffie and
I love it.
Darwin Cook a
Yeah.
little bit and Bruce Timm a bunch. And, you mentioned Beware the Batman. It's the only cartoon I've written an episode of where the episode came out. And much like the comic, I wrote very short-lived, but tremendous and fun. And in the larger theme of what you're doing here, I will just say the thing that is interesting to me is how much storytelling is the same across all the different media. Like the
Yeah.
same challenges and the same rules and the same idea of like, if the characters ring true, the audience for it will follow them anywhere. And if they don't ring true, it won't matter how well produced or how clever anything is. If
Hmm.
Superman doesn't seem like Superman and it's a Superman project, people smell it. People smell it and
True
they
enough.
reject it. And it's really, knowing how storytelling works that way really works across all media, all styles of stories. Telling people stories on a podcast, it's all the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the storytelling art, and you clearly have it with that transition from the origin to web spaces. That was a great
Thank
transition.
you.
That was a
Thank you.
panel to panel uh, masterwork right there.
But
Uh,
as Scott McCloud would say, it's in the gutter. It's the
that's
space
right.
between the two panels that is really where the engagement happens.
That's
So,
right. That's
yeah.
right. So you, dear
Thank you.
listener out there in Zoom land and YouTube land, you made that happen. That's
Thank you so
right.
much, Jake. Look, this was an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure.
Great to talk with you too, and glad to have you back anytime.